Hi, I'm Etta Spencer, and today we're going to Glasgow, Scotland. I just now found out that. I thought I was talking to a guy who's in Victoria, British Columbia. But no, you never know these days where people are going to say they were. Yesterday, I thought I was talking to somebody who was in England, but he was in Cape Town, South Africa. So,
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, hello, Bud Hall. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Meta. Hi, Meta. Great to see you, and thank you so much for including me in your podcast series. I've heard a number of them earlier, but I didn't expect that I'd be, invited. But thank you very much.
Sure, yeah, we have a lot of things to talk about, I'm sure, and I know that what the main thing is. I think you have been using the term community-based research. And I didn't know what that was, although before I even called you or set this up, I knew that we had certain things in common, certain values. For example, I really have had the feeling that that universities are too much really ivory towers, and that we need to have much more engagement with, you say, with the community. I'm not such a community-oriented person. I'm an international person. Matter of fact, today there's an election going on. I'm supposed to go vote, and I haven't looked at any of the papers, or I have no idea whom I should vote for, or I haven't even thought about it. I don't know who's running. I mean, I'm just not oriented locally. But if you ask me about what's going on in Moscow, I could go on at quite a length about that, or other parts of the world. So I'm not that oriented toward communities, but I certainly am oriented toward using academic resources for discovering information that would be relevant to solving human problems. And that problem orientation is what I think we both share from the get-go. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we share a lot more than that, of course, but that's certainly a good place to start.
Okay. Well, so when I looked at a video that you had made on YouTube, I heard you using this term community-based research. And I didn't quite know what that meant, because I certainly understand what it means to have academics do research that's relevant to the wider society, or the whole world. But, I was thinking back, when have I ever done anything that looks like community-based research? Well, here's one for you. Tell me if it fits. When I used to teach a lot of introductory sociology, and I had 1 year, maybe more than one, instead of just textbooks, I had my students subscribe to a newspaper, and they had to read the newspaper every day, and they had to get something published in a newspaper. And that was what was part of their assignment for the year. Is maybe it would just be a letter to the editor, but it could be any newspaper. It could be one of those local newspapers that people, throw up on your front porch that's just mostly full of ads. Could be anything. But that was the assignment, was that they were supposed to find out something that was relevant to the local community, or that was being discussed, and do some research and be able to produce something that other people would find worth reading. Is that community-based research?
Well, it's moving in the right direction, Meta. You, just before we went live, you told me that you'd found some people using the term public sociology. Mm-hmm. Public sociology is very close to to what others of us call community-based research. And basically, these and other words, there's words like engaged scholarship, participatory action research. There's quite a number of words that refer to more or less similar things. And the basic idea is that knowledge is created. In fact, most knowledge is created outside of universities. We have a particular as academics, we take knowledge which comes from from life, either physical life or sociological or social or ecological or economic life, and we theorize about it. We write it up in ways that other academics can understand it and so forth, and circulate that around and hope for the best, hope that it makes a difference in people's lives. But most knowledge about getting along, getting through life is actually in the daily lives of people who are trying to pay the bills, or trying to survive in spite of migration or war or climate catastrophes in their parts of the world, or
just a sec, because the first thing that springs to mind when you talk about that is that people just go Google things, Google, find out, how does my pressure cooker work? Or what do I need to fix flat tires that I should carry in the car?
Yes.
Handy knowledge that you get that way. Maybe we don't need research. We've got all these answers already. People are putting these little factual tidbits out there where we can get them on Google.
Well, I use Google every day for similar ways that you do, and usually to try and make my computer work.
Right.
But so community-based research, when you read about stuff like that, it basically means research where the research idea comes from outside of the academy, and could come from in a social movement. It could come from a group of people that are homeless. Could be I remember a wonderful project in Toronto that I worked on years ago, 22 years ago, that was in the community health center in Parkdale, where injection drug users were researchers. They were actually doing research on harm reduction and coming up and getting a lot more useful advice, practical advice for keeping people alive. But another big area where you see what people mean by this community-based research is with indigenous communities. Now with recent years, we're so much more attuned, to indigenous ways of knowing and indigenous knowledge, and indigenous knowledge keepers have been creating, validating, managing, keeping knowledge alive, for thousands of years before any people who look like you and I came to this part of the world. So community-based research recognizes that knowledge can be created outside of the academy, and what we are looking for is ways to create equitable and respectful kind of social relations with knowledge keepers in community, and people who work on knowledge issues in the academy, with the idea that the combination of the different knowledge cultures will make for a more effective, perhaps a more rapid change, in health issues or policy issues, or building your movement, strengthening the movement so that you can get more work done. So
what happens? Do you, if somebody comes at you and says, we have a particular issue we want to find out has some health implications for this, the people living in tents now, let's say,
yes.
Do you offer to try to put methodology, statistical methodology or research techniques at their service, or how do you blend these two research cultures?
Well, that's a really good question, and it starts with an initial conversation would be really to kind of clarify whether or not this is kind of a research issue or something. It's maybe a kind of public information issue, or communication issue. But may not be it may not be researchable. But if, for example, working with people, people living in tents, and I know that in Toronto in the last few years, you've had quite a few people living in tents in your parks. We have as well in Victoria, by the way. And you want to know, what what most of the people living in tents think about, or what their ideas are as to how to move from tents into, better quality housing, then that is a researchable question. So then, you talk with whoever it is that's come forward, and first of all, you'd probably want to form a bit of a group with maybe some of the other people that are, living in tents, and maybe one or two other, maybe you've got a student or, some other academics that are interested in the issue, and form a kind of a working group to kind of play it out. And then talk about what would make the most, what kind of evidence, would have the most impact on policy, on housing policy. So you may want to combine the kind of evidence that traditionally works with policy circles are two kinds. One is quantitative data, so you can have charts and statistics and so forth, and another are stories, and you need both. If you just come with a chart and you don't have the story, well, politicians for sure don't understand the charts, and they are story people, and human beings are actually pretty much story people. So for gathering stories, you need to use qualitative methods, and we actually use a lot of arts-based methods. So you can tell your story through a piece of theater, or you can tell it through to song or poetry or murals or dance or all kinds of different things. And we find that those kinds of storying in that way can be very effective when you're taking your data, taking your stories to city officials or provincial authorities or funding bodies or whatever. So but the decision about what kind of methods you're going to use is one that becomes a joint conversation. So it's not just Bud, saying, well, I can show you how to do a certain kind of statistical stuff. I'll say, here's some of the things I know how to do, but here's some things that other people have used, and what do you think would be the most effective? And
you're talking about something in a framework as if the people, let's say the people living in tents, are the authors along with the researchers who maybe have a grant to come and do this. Do you actually publish things as if this were a joint piece of research, or there is a long tradition, would never be called community-based research or what you do, a long tradition of participant observation, or people just going and living in a community. Anthropologists have always done this, and then they go home and write it up, or they write it up while they're there, but they don't necessarily give credit as authors to the subjects that they're studying. For example, I have a dear friend, Arlie Hochschild, who is now studying the Nazis in the US. These guys who had that big torchlight march in Charlottetown or wherever that is. She's hanging out with those people, trying to get to know them and get inside their heads. Well, you can be sure she's not going to have their names on the book as co-authors.
No. And let me be clear, community-based research isn't the only kind of useful ethical work for knowledge workers to perform. So, but yes, in terms of, we, for example, when we work with, indigenous knowledge keepers in communities, we put everybody's name on the article, or for doing work, it depends on the length of time. But if you work over 4 or 5 months with people, and you actually analyze the stuff together, because you think about the usual steps in any research. It's thinking up the problem, thinking up the methods, analyzing the data, deciding what to do with it. Well, if you're engaged in a conversation, with people, the so-called, subjects of the research, who that suddenly are now, your equal in terms of trying to make sense of what you've just done, then they are authors. They are authors. Mm-hmm. And so you do find, if you look in, there's the Canadian Journal of Engaged Scholarship comes out of Saskatchewan. You'll see a lot of multiple authors in those things. And so yes, that's certainly something that's being done more and more. And I had a doctoral student when I was at OISE, who she was working with Indigenous women in the Yukon, who had experienced sexual abuse. She did a fantastic study, but she did it with them, collectively with them. And she, when she finished her thesis and brought it, to me and to the committee, we read it through and we said, yes, it's ready to go. It's ready to go to, final exam, final oral, and let's set the date. And she said, no. She says, we can't set the date. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm sending this back to the community and I want them to read it. And if they like what I've said and are comfortable with what I've done, she said, I will go forward with the oral. But if they are uncomfortable, she said, then the process stops right here. And I've always remembered that. And she sent it back to them, and they liked, what she'd done. And she came and did a fabulous, fabulous defense, because she knew that work so well from having, lived and worked with those women over a period of a couple of.
You should have given a doctorate to those women too.
Well, I know and that is one of the questions that you really find yourself wondering about is in terms of doing this kind of work for degrees, so there's a lot of, I think as time moves on and as we evolve in new ways of working, as knowledge workers, some of these things we'll have to confront them a little bit more than we have been so far.
It would take us too far afield if we wanted to talk about it, but I do think that it may be that some of the current populist movement, which has a very strong anti-elitism orientation and a very strong resentment of scientists, in particular, although any kind of knowledge workers, IT workers, for example, are considered sort of the enemy. And I think it may have to do with the fact that a certain kind of credential gets you authority and respectability and more money. And that it may be that some of the people who don't have those credentials feel that this distinction is not fair, and that we have to rethink how we give respect to people, or what kinds of criteria we use in deciding whether somebody is an authority or not, which would really shake some of the structures that we depend on as elites, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a very thoughtful reflection that I've thought a lot about, as we all have. We're living in this era where seemingly irrational, kinds of right-wing populism and, white extremism and all this stuff is popping up even here in Canada. If you keep, think about our truck driver, episodes there in Ottawa not long ago. I think you're right. I think, and I think this is one of the things. I've just come I'm just 2 weeks away from being at the UNESCO World Higher Education Conference, and which they hold every 12 years. So they don't do it very often, and a lot of people were there, and there are a lot of serious questions about topics like decolonizing higher education. Really taking a deep dive into what does social responsibility really mean. There was recognition in the three big reports that came out. Three big themes came out from all of the reports. One was the importance of interdisciplinarity, and this is something, of course, you've been, part of your whole career. The fact that we've got to, that we're not going to solve, these kind of big complex problems, by remaining as economists and sociologists and geographers. No, but that may be fine for a career, but it isn't fine for problem solving. The second thing that they came up with is recognition of multiple epistemologies. And so recognizing that the kind of the Western canon, this kind of, Euro-Western knowledge base, which most universities in the world are based upon, is only one, of many epistemological systems. And we really need to, unpack, and find ways to gain access to other ways of thinking, because there are a lot of other knowledge systems, indigenous ones, for example, where the relationship with nature is very different. And it may be that the Western, idea of science, which has delivered such remarkable technological advances, but has been relatively deaf to ecological damage that's been done. And now we find ourselves in this, this very difficult climate crisis because we're detached, from the rest of nature. And the third main theme that came out of that conference was the importance of basically a new contract between universities and society, so that they're not so much distance. Just like is exactly what you're saying, that we've grown apart. Universities were founded by ordinary people wanting to learn, but we've become very specialized and sophisticated, organizations, and maybe we've lost track of where we started. So,
the place where I find that most is in sort of the norm, especially in certain areas in the social sciences, where people get really antsy, academics get really antsy if you get into advocacy.
Yes.
You have to be really careful when you come right out and say, I believe this is the way we ought to do things, or this is the best answer to a social problem. There's sort of, and it's not well defined. There's no rule book that will tell you what you're allowed to say and what you're not. But people do not want to look like they're on a bandwagon of any kind. And they really put some negative sanctions on people who come out and sound as if they're out in the street trying to create a movement.
Yeah, well, that's true, and there's a reason why. That's the kind of that's one of the negative aspects of the knowledge culture within academies is that think about it over the years. You and I have both been around universities and intellectual life for so many years. If you think about the way that universities have been able to absorb, the most radical of ideas, the most radical of people. You can hire them, they can teach, you do what they want, but they somehow the practical part of the implications, the action implications of that theoretical work are washed away. And so I remember when I came to OISE after those years in the International Council, which was an activist practitioner. It was people doing things every day, not just talking about it. And I came a lot of good friends that I had at OISE before I joined as a full-time academic, were Marxists and wrote all kinds of wonderful radical papers. What I discovered when I got there is that they had no praxis. They weren't involved in anything outside of they were debating other Marxists or other. So that part of that's one of the challenges that we have in trying to reimagine a university that is more value based. But if we're not able to do it, then universities will lose. They'll lose relevance, and eventually they'll lose funding as well, because even governments, even bad governments,
they already have. I mean, not losing money so much or anything, but certainly, I think it's not that they're losing relevance. They maintain a desire not to have relevance.
Yes.
It's a mutual avoidance, I think. For example, right now, what we're talking about is, I think, really public education. We're talking, you and I are presenting a discussion that could be relevant to all kinds of other things that people should be concerned about. But this has absolutely no contact with the university. There's no way that my department, anybody in my department, even knows what I'm doing. And I have no contact with them anymore, because they do sociology, and what I'm doing here is apparently not sociology, right? I mean, it's not funny, Why isn't this sociology? I think it is.
I think it is too, and there is. I just did a review of a book a fellow from Scotland had done on public sociology, and that is, it's not the dominant theme, but it's a legitimate stream of activity within sociology. And so what you and I are doing right now is very much within that public sociology. But different departments have different histories, and they have their own culture. So for example, when I was at the U of T, the social work department at the U of T has been a fairly cautious, a fairly cautious one. It's not been, sort of, you were talking about advocacy. It's not and so my idea about what social work was as a field, was, well, it's interesting, but it's a bit cautious. I got out to University of Victoria, and that social work department is a bunch of feminist, indigenous, activist, kind of people. It was just on fire, and they've done some fabulous stuff. So there's a lot of variations. The problem is that and I faced it for years. I tried to teach this kind of stuff from about 1975. I wasn't able to even teach a course anywhere in the Toronto area until 1989, and finally, environmental studies at York University gave me a course, and I was able to do it. Now, when I became chair in adult ed, of course, I gave myself permission to teach it, and I was able to do it there.
What did you call your course?
I have called my course, I think, just participatory research. Theory and practice of
Well, it's not just research. I mean, that's what
No.
we started talking about, but it's the notion of activism, linking it to
Yes.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Here's the most extreme example of. I mean, you could transfer it to a university setting, but I had a former student who is now a high school teacher, and he's quite a radical. He's not a Marxist. I don't know what he is, but he's certainly a reformer of some conviction. And he told me once that what he did was he had a discussion going on in his class about something that was important locally, some political issue. So they marched out of their classroom as a class down to local city hall to their particular, city councilor's office and stood there and chanted. That is, I think, the most extreme example of trying to apply advocacy and knowledge. So, obviously I don't know what kind of trouble he got into for doing that, but I bet I don't recall. I think he didn't get away with it, Laura.
No. Well, a book that influenced me, I think it was written way back in 1968 by Gunnar Myrdal. You might have run into it.
I remember that book.
the Myth of Objectivity in Social Sciences. And that was one that got me to think about social sciences and science really in a different way. And I had read that prior to going to Tanzania. So when I ended up in Tanzania with a very different context, I felt Myrdal had given me in a way intellectual permission to think outside of objectivity as the golden mean for academic performance.
Mm-hmm. Actually, when you mentioned his name, I was thinking of An American Dilemma, which I think was
yes,
a big, a real asset to the whole campaign against racism. And
yes,
yeah, he was quite an amazing man. And his wife too, Alva.
Alva Myrdal. Yes, indeed. In just a kind of a side story. Gunnar Myrdal was a great believer and worked in the Swedish folk high school movement. And Tanzania, when I was there, we had quite a few, I think 8 or 9 Swedish adult educators who all came from those Swedish folk high schools. And so they all were steeped in that kind of, Myrdal, sort of stuff. So it's a small world.
I've heard the word, but I don't know anything about those schools. What's distinctive about them? Well,
they still exist. Sweden, they are schools for, I guess they got started in kind of in the countryside, and they offered a space for young men and women who were living in rural areas, farm families in those early days, a place to study and to they weren't universities, but you could get credentials, and for a variety of reasons they had a very strong kind of value base. They were egalitarian, gender relations were better than in conventional universities and society way back. And they were open to.
They teach different things. Was the curriculum different from kids going preparing for?
Yes, they were much more open. They were internationalists. For example, they studied different parts of the world, and they were based themselves on the lived experiences of the young people who came there. So it was a kind of a combination of kind of academic life and self-examination of young people, and they were all over the place. There's still a lot of them in Sweden, folk high school. It's part of the kind of the Nordic adult education system, which put a lot more emphasis on, adult education, with the as a and very and linked to, and the folk high schools were too linked to social movements. So you have folk high schools linked to the peace movements, linked to the labor movements, linked to the to the temperance movements. Very interesting.
Well, were they prepared for university? If people did decide they wanted to go ahead and become academics or something, or professionals, could they were they able to switch over and go into universities?
So yes, they were. Of course, those were the days, though, when spots in universities were much rarer. Now in places like Sweden and Finland and Norway, the participation in universities is, I don't know, 60% or so. Is way up there. But in those days, universities were very, there are very few places. So these were places where people could go who weren't able to, would not have been able to afford or move away from home in order to go to school.
Well, I think now they're probably free. Or almost.
They may well be. They may well be.
Now, as far as this meeting you've been to, UNESCO, where did it meet, and what when they talk this last point that making the universities, remodeling the universities, or so on? Please elaborate. How would they be changing universities?
Well, the meeting took place in Barcelona.
A wonderful place.
Yeah, yes, it is. And it was organized by the organizers were an organization called the GUNI, Global University Network for Innovation. And, UNESCO, UNESCO well. UNESCO is an intergovernmental agency. This was a category, it was a category 3 conference, which meant that it did not have to have, ministers of education, coming from every country, and the focus was on bringing higher education experts. But the delegations, there were, delegations from 196 countries, so there were about 1,800 people there. From somebody from almost every country, quite a few people, extra ones from Spain, because Spain was hosting the thing, and then the various UNESCO chairs. So the reason I was there is that my partner Rajesh Ten from India and myself, we hold a UNESCO chair. So the UNESCO chairs were included as part of the kind of the participants and the contributors for the conference, and it took place over. It took place over. There was a technical part of the conference which was quite restrictive. Not everybody could get into that, but then there was a week-long thing, which Rajesh and I were active in from the 14th to the 20th. In preparation for that conference, there were 3 documents, one on the future of education, another one on transforming higher education for sustainability, and another one on called a new vision for higher education. And quite a lot of work, a couple of years worth of research and teamwork by people from all over the world went into those studies, and those were released at the conference. But we supported as well. We supported 5 or 6 different events there. One of them, though, I think probably the most powerful, was something called an Indigenous Perspectives Circle on the future of higher education, which was led by a Lillooet woman called Lorna Williams from BC, and Laurie Robinson from Ontario. Laurie is the executive director of the Indigenous Advanced Education and Skills Council in Ontario, which has the responsibility for, I think there's seven or 10 Indigenous higher education institutions in Ontario that now have been given permission to offer degrees. And so it's a really new and dramatic, change in Ontario university legislature.
Where are they based? I mean, this new.
It's in the Ministry of Education.
Well,
Laurie
where do they hold their
Robinson.
classes?
Oh, there's university. They are, they have been in existence. They're not new. There have been a number of Indigenous. The one I remember when I was there, the only one I really knew about was in down past Belleville, in Mohawk territory. I think it used to be called the Mohawk, Technical Institute. It's probably got another, more indigenous name now. But it's been going for 30 years, but they were never able to. They issued different kinds of certificates, vocational certificates, but they were never able to issue degrees. And these now these 7 or 8 of these different institutes are now able to issue degrees. So they're in a process of development. And Laurie,
some of them then would be on reserves or near reserves?
Yes, they would all be on reserves. I think there's one at Six Nations, for example. I know there's the one down in Tyendinaga, and down in the Mohawk territory. But I think there's another one in Algoma. But it's IAESC, and they're really, actually, if you're want to have an interesting person for a podcast, Laurie Robinson is just wonderful. She's terrific, and they're doing. It's the only jurisdiction in Canada that's actually doing this. All other Indigenous higher education structures issue their degrees through non-Indigenous universities.
Okay, so you're saying they do issue it through something that's not a university?
No, they've become their status has changed, so they now have university status.
Oh, okay.
There's legislation, I think, about 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
Surely
it's quite new.
There must be it must be open to people who are not Indigenous people.
I'm sure it's true. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'm sure they'd be open to anybody.
Oh, I'd like to find out more. I will try to look into it because I don't know anything about it at all. Uh-huh.
Yeah, if you have
say that the this report that you're discussing offered proposals for changing universities in general, and I wonder, we're not just talking about creating a new kind of outfit, but what kinds of changes are they?
Well, what kinds of things? What I'm going to do is afterwards, I'll give you the link to the reports, Meta, because they're interesting. There's a lot of things that one can do. For example, one of the universities that told their story is a university in Colombia, and they're doing away with disciplinary departments, and they are reorganizing along issue themes. So on water or housing or food security, and so and people are being brought from engineering, sociology, education, and so forth, into these issue-based departments so that they can work collaboratively together. And they are also devoting. They're also making links with the physical community where they're located,
Mhm.
because they want to build the economy, and they want to provide jobs for young people, in that state. It's the state of Tolima, and because a lot of these universities are training people, and there are no jobs locally, so they train young people, and the young people go to the big cities, or from India they go to Europe or Canada or the US or whatever. And so the universities are basically training the workforce.
They used to call
Yeah,
it a brain drain. I don't know whether
exactly.
they do. Mhm.
And that's because they've been training people on a kind of universal model, a decontextualized, something that's kind of one size fits all. So their graduates can work anywhere, but they don't have any, in-depth knowledge about the area where they're actually living, the history, the hydrology, the whatever. And so that's interesting.
Oh yeah, that would be a real switch.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to think universally, so I would be probably looking at ways in which certain kinds of knowledge could be useful everywhere. I don't look as much, although it's just a different style of thinking, I guess, because there's certainly room for people who are deeply engaged in one particular locality.
But they don't have to. You don't have to make the choice. It's not either or. That you can. I think the way I think about it is that what we need is we need access to many more of the ways of thinking beyond just the kind of the Western way that that I was taught. And what I think is that in the West, kind of Western knowledge, it's only about 550 years old. It's not that old, and it's carried us a long ways. But I don't think it's capable of carrying us in a healthy way forever. And I think that we need to find ways to to learn from other parts of the world, other knowledge systems. But where do you find? But I also think that knowledge, that if we don't have that, it's really important for us to kind of the Swedish saying translated in English called "dig where you stand." I think that digging where we stand. It's like in poetry or in literature. If you write about your own deepest personal thoughts, what you find is that you're writing to everybody, because other people can relate to that. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing, I think, with knowledge construction. And the more we know about the way life is put together in places where we live, the easier it'll be for us to relate to everybody else who is also deeply engaged in their own local. So it's not a choice.
Well, give me some examples of research, community-based research that you did in Tanzania, because and maybe that would help me understand more the point you're just making. If in fact a local kind of issue that was relevant to those people, that was generated by the questions they were asking, how useful would anybody find that here in Toronto or in Victoria, where you normally hang out?
Yeah, well, in Toronto, you've got some very good people in Toronto doing great community-based research, and there's something at the Scarborough campus, a fellow called Leslie Chan runs something called the Knowledge Equity Lab. And he's another very interesting person, thinker, and doer, using knowledge to make a better world. And they are linked up with something called the let's see, it's the Toronto, I think it's the Toronto Learning Center. Toronto Learning Center. What goes on at the Toronto Learning Center is this is a center mostly for immigrant women. It's an adult education center where they come, and they have trained the women that are coming there. They've trained those women to be researchers. These are not, these are just ordinary, women who knows what sort of academic background they come with. It's not important. They come to there to learn, and they've trained those women to be researchers on different issues that are, that they're interested in. And so they've done research on childcare. They've done research on, on gender violence. They've done research on, on jobs, and they've written those things up, and they've presented them, at city council and at local other places. And many of those women have gotten jobs, now working in local government or working for NGOs or something like that, and as well as contributed, useful knowledge to, what might, happen, to make their lives better. And
that's you partly answered a question I wanted to ask, which was, once the information is generated by this research, where do they publish it? Because academics normally publish it in a journal and nobody ever reads it. And that's exactly the main problem that you and I have been, troubled by, is the fact that it's all wasted effort if it doesn't get read. So where do people publish their findings if they're doing community-based research in general?
Well, some people still publish, in journals, particularly the academic side, because they, it's part of their career thing. They have to publish something. But there's about 35 journals, good journals now, that specialize in this kind of research. And most of them are open access or free to anybody who wants to read them online. But the doing an article is just the tip of the iceberg, because the people are doing videos, they're doing exhibitions, they're doing plays, they're writing their stuff up in zines, little magazine kind of things. They're thinking about, so the main focus is who do they need to reach in order to have some impact on their issue. If it's a housing policy, who are the people in Toronto who can have any influence on that? And so those people become the audience, and that's much more important, than an article, which, as you say, it may or may not make very much difference. So the focus is on, on this term people called knowledge mobilization, which is making the knowledge work, for the intended beneficiaries working on their behalf.
Let me ask you about the other role that you alluded to, that you and some guy in India are co-chairs of something. Yes. I don't know how you'd be a co-chair of something, but explain.
Yeah, UNESCO has an instrument which they call a UNESCO chair in a particular subject area, and they have all over the world about 600 of these things. And what they all have in common is that they are supposed to help build research capacity in the theme of the chair in the global south through south-north and south-south collaboration. So the chair that my colleague Rajesh Tandon, he's a founding president of a of something called participatory research in Asia. It's been going for 40 years. It's a community-based nonprofit research and training institution in India. And we said, well, we want to do a chair in community-based research, but we can't do it, there's no point in just an academic from Canada doing it, and why don't we share it? We'll have it, one academic, one northern academic, and one southern NGO. And so we were able to get them to allow us to be co-chairs. And we've worked together for now almost 45 years.
Really?
So it's, so we've known each other, a long, long time. And so the title, it's a great big long title. The title, it's the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education. And so we do advocacy in terms of community-based, community-engaged, community university engagement, and that whole conversation which we've just been having. And we do advocacy on behalf of, kind of research strategies, but we also run we have a training program called the Knowledge for Change Consortium for Training in Community-Based Research. And we've supported the development of 23 Knowledge for Change hubs, which are now training young people. It's a strategy for providing learning opportunities for youth in university and youth in community to learn together about community-based research, and in 16 different countries. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of the capacity building stuff that we do.
Mm-hmm. Sounds wonderful. Well, okay, this has been very enlightening to me. You've given me 6 or 8 different things I now have to look up and find out more about. Before. So this has been great. So what are you doing in Glasgow? It's time for us to wind up, and your phone is going to shut down on you.
Yes, I'm actually doing a talk with the big union in one of the big unions in the UK. Is called Unite the Union, and we've worked with them to create a training hub in community-based research, which will be led by union members themselves. And we're doing a talk at a adult education conference about the union's role in community-based research.
Oh, okay, great idea. Yeah. Okay, good luck with it.
Thank you so much, Meta. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, we've sort of known of each other, and
yes,
but we've never had a good heart-to-heart talk before.
Yeah, it's great. It's wonderful to. You ask such great questions. I really have enjoyed the conversation. So let's we don't have to. Yeah, let's stay in touch.
All right. Bless you. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more. This is episode 461. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get there, look around, because we have conversations going on all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through Press Reader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.